Wow.
There you go.
All righty.
Wow.
Here we are. All righty. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Let's see. Let's give it a minute or two for people to join. Here we are. All righty. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Let's see. Let's give it a. Okay. There we go. Sorry, I had to mute. Give us just a sec here. All righty. We're back. Great. Okay. All righty. Thank you, everybody, for joining Entrepreneurship Abroad, Building a Business in Asia, brought to you by the UCLA Alumni Association. My name is Matt Saucedo. I am a UCLA Alumni Association board member. And we have three amazing panelists here that we're going to be interviewing today. Ken, Tommy, and Jennifer. We'll go through and do quick intros for each of us as we wait for people to join. Thank you, everybody who took the time out of their schedules to meet with us today. Thank you, everybody in the crowd watching. This is going to be a really fun conversation about what it takes to come up with an idea in Asia, build a business, and scale it. So it's going to be fun. Ken, why don't you kick us off? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what you did at UCLA, what you're up to now.
Great. Thank you, Matt. Hello, Jennifer and Tommy. I'm glad to be here from Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam. And I was born in Vietnam, 3 years old, went to the United States, studied in the US in Orange County, where the large Vietnamese population. I went to UCLA 99 to 2003, studied economics, international area studies, and went to Spain to do the EAP program, first time leaving the country. And then after that, just wanted to do international business. So I went to law school and MBA school in San Francisco at Golden Gate University. And then finally did LLM in taxation at Chapman University down in Southern California. 2009, I opened up my law firm, so I licensed in California with an office in Vietnam, doing international business transactions. And fast forward 10 years later, I'm based out of Vietnam now for the last 4 years, managing our office here in Ho Chi Minh City. And we have an office in Bangkok and in Singapore, mostly servicing small, medium-sized companies and empowering them to go international outside of their borders with legal and financial services.
Wonderful, wonderful. Jennifer, how about you?
Yeah, Jennifer first.
Sure. Hi. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Oh.
Hi. Yes. So I am Jennifer Lowe. I am a social entrepreneur. I graduated in '98 from UCLA in Biz Econ. Those were the best years of my life, as I've always said, up till now. But it's so it's been a journey for me. I was, after I graduated, I kind of followed family footsteps into real estate. I was working with a firm down in La Jolla for about 5 years doing real estate development, hotel development in particular. And it's somewhat still for me, an area of passion, working with real estate and development and all of that. And then 5 years later, I moved back to Singapore. That time I had my first child. This was in 2002, 2003. And we started up a children's museum. This was when I realized there was a gap in the education space within Singapore. So decided to start up this social enterprise that focused on developing content for children, but also raised children's voices, not just within Singapore, but in the region as well. So it's been about, 10 years since since we first got started with the business, with our first projects and all of that. It's still running as a charity at the moment, And I've taken kind of what I've done with the children's content on a separate tangent. I'm now executive producer for a global music project that will eventually be a musical. So that's kind of in a nutshell, a little bit what I've been doing. I've also, in between during that time, I've also been running the family's involvement in medical aesthetics within the region. So for 3 years, I was running the business, and that was mainly in Singapore and China, and parts of Southeast Asia as well, and taking that to Europe as well. So that's been kind of my life past UCLA in a nutshell.
Wonderful, wonderful. Tommy, how about you?
Cool. I went to UCLA in 2006 and graduated 2009. I was also in econ. Most of us in econ, right? I was having econ and math major. So but then I was aiming to become an academic after that and want to do a PhD in economics. But then I did a gap year after my graduation. During that year, I worked for banks and consultants, involved in some involved in the presidential election, like think tank stuff. It was wonderful. But then that was the last year I had in I stayed in California. And then afterwards, I returned to schools. I went to London for my PhD in economics. And I thought I was everything set up for my economic professorship. But then I quit it. I quit it after like a year and a half, kind of for a reason that, well, I felt like I had another calling, because during the time when I was in London, I traveled around to do tutoring, to do teaching for economic, for math, for kids, and sometimes for adults. And I find out that, well, maybe I could do something big in education. So I quit my PhD for a startup. And that was my first startup to do something like an online tutorial platform, which is like a really pioneer in the MOOC online open course formats. But then after a few years, I sold I sold my first venture, and I'm now on my second venture, which is hoping to connect people, but then still in the education space, which is to decentralize classroom, so that people can learn anywhere around the globe. Could be in people's meeting room, could be in Starbucks, meeting new people, learning new stuff. I'm doing things like that. So basically, right now I'm more engaged in the education technology industry since my graduation.
Got it. You know, it's really interesting hearing each of your experiences and kind of the ways in which you got involved in entrepreneurship. I think one of the things that stands out to me most about your stories is that there really isn't a single way in which it happens, right? It's not like you know, everybody kind of had the same experience coming straight out of UCLA. And I think a big part of that is the relationships that kind of we built along the way. Really help influence the direction which we go. And I was wondering if you guys could share a little bit about, you know, what were some of those relationships that you guys built that really helped influence your thought process as it went around starting your businesses and getting things set up. Jennifer, you want to kick us off? Go for it.
So I think for me, it was, I kind of fell into the space, right? I had always thought I would start up my business at some point. When I first worked for the real estate business in La Jolla, that was really to get experience. I started up in a small company where there were only 6 people and 3 people in management, including me. I was given a lot of responsibility as my first job almost when I first started. So I was very fortunate in that respect. I worked directly with the CEO of the company. I led meetings. You know, in my second year with the company, I was leading meetings with potential partners and all of that. I was given a lot of responsibilities from the very start. So I was lucky in that sense that I was given the exposure, then, and that also gave me a lot of confidence in getting started when I came back to Singapore. So for me, when I said I fell into entrepreneurship with that first business, it was really because when I found the gap in Singapore, I found that, you know, there wasn't any informal learning spaces that were meaningful. So in having seen children's museums, children's spaces around the world, I had approached the National Heritage Board in Singapore and said, why isn't there a children's museum in Singapore? And said, well, we've thought about it, we planned it, we that didn't get going. But if you'd like to start one up, we've got grants you can tap into. So that was kind of what got me started. And I said, sure, I'll take up the challenge. And there I went. I had a co-founder with me at that point.
How did you meet your co-founder?
So I was maybe about a year into the project, into starting to think that I would like to get this going. And so she was a fellow mother, and we'd met through our children. And she heard about what I was trying to do, and so I said, yeah, that'd be great. I need someone to just kind of help me get going, and that was really helpful. You know, when you're on the entrepreneurship path and you're doing it all alone, it could get very tiresome, and also, you know, having somebody else to kind of be able to have that bouncing board, and also to just, you know, be able to discuss things and brainstorm. I mean, that's what I missed from having teams or people that I worked with. So that was really helpful. So in terms of people that have helped me, I guess I'd say the grant with the National Heritage Board in Singapore, that helped get things going. But it was really actually the people that you built along the way. So the people who saw the passion in me wanting to get this going, and them also, you know, being part of the space and wanting to be part of it. I think when you build that community around you, that helps you to keep going. So that for me was really important.
That notion of building a community. I'm curious, Tommy, Ken, how did you guys think about building community as you kind of started and went along this journey?
I would say for community, it's kind of the most important things, because right now, particularly in my space of doing education technology, right? So lots of people may think that, well, when internet comes, things change, right? But then honestly, not many things change. Are we really purely learning and everything online? Can we skip UCLA by having all 4 years of online course? It's difficult. It's basically because we need a community. It's still we a human being. We belong to community. So it's really important to connect people in a community. So let me pick an example for one of the projects that I have been doing. I have been teaching kids programming. So teaching kids and adults programming have been one of my projects. But then we decentralize them so that my clients, the students and the teachers, they meet around the globe, anywhere. Not same things goes to Hong Kong, go to my Tokyo project. But then we need to build community by we decentralize them to learn effectively, but then we still gather them to learn in a community, like building a hackathon project for the community that the people live in. Let's say we have a bunch of students living in the Tin Hau area, a residential area in Hong Kong, so that we build monthly hackathon project, which is to connect the students so that the program that they code will be benefiting the community. And in the end, I see a lot of good positive externality, and the loop starts growing, which is the boss, the owners of shops providing insight for our students like evolving their project, like refactoring their code for the community that they live in. I would say it's one of the projects that I find out internet and community, it's not only internet community, but then internet have to go offline to connect to the people. And it works.
Interesting. That's fascinating. So building off of that, Ken, I'm curious. You are in a unique position where you get to work with businesses here in the U.S., in Vietnam, and I was wondering if you could share kind of what your perspective has been like, seeing the differences in terms of the way businesses operate in Asia versus here, and if there's any nuance there that you could kind of share with us.
Sure. So I started a law firm in 2009 in Orange County, moving back. And I guess as starting off attorney, I actually didn't get to work for any law firms. And it's a little bit unique because I had interned in Vietnam twice when I was in law school. And then when I passed the bar, the Vietnam attorney asked if I wanted to open up an international firm together and move back to the States. So I actually came back.
You must make quite the impression.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've always been an entrepreneur. That's why I got the MBA to open up my own business. So when I opened up, it was actually very difficult. I only had $5,000, got a loan from my uncle. So I guess this is a story. If you really look back, it's very interesting. Is 5,000, but I had rented because law is a very traditional practice. So I rented an office for $1,500 a month because I always saw on television. I have no family members who are lawyers, that I needed to have an office and then a separate office with a secretary in front. So that's what I did, although I couldn't afford a secretary. And pretty much what they always joke is new lawyers. And I looked really young back then. I didn't have a goatee, so I was 27 years old, and people didn't trust me that with their work. So I just did what I knew was from internships, forming companies. So we just focus on corporate law, forming companies. And in the United States, when there's a trust for lawyers, and they use lawyers for their business transactions, for their family, for the criminal cases. So it's very common to use lawyers, at least ask for advice before you enter into business transactions. So we represented a lot of clients, small companies. We had a startup community as well. But I guess for me, it was getting a little bit monotonous because most the companies that come similar issues. So I started expanding internationally and going to Vietnam a lot more. It was really through UCLA's EAP that made me think about the international world. I went to Spain, studied Spanish. At one point, my Spanish was better than my Vietnamese, even though I'm ethnically Vietnamese. But during the boom in the 2000s of the China market, I thought about learning Chinese. And I started taking courses in Chinese as well. But I realized, okay, I think I should focus on Vietnamese because I already have a background, and then Vietnam has an opportunity as well. And then coming here now for the last 4 years, the clients are much, much different. We separate into two types of clients. We have foreign clients who are US companies, Japanese, Korean, Hong Kong, Singapore companies who enter into Vietnam, and they act similar to US companies. The respect for lawyers, asking for advice before you transact in the country. And so the respective legal systems encourage you to use lawyers. So it's very similar to the US. However, we also have a group of Vietnamese clients who also expand internationally, and they're a totally different breed of clients. They would actually, they don't really need lawyers. They feel there's lobbying, there's relationships. So they would actually use a lawyer as a last resort. And to be honest, sometimes they're very disrespectful to your knowledge and your intellectual property. Because they feel they can get things done, and many of them do, to be honest. So therefore, when I work with clients in Vietnam, it's a different level of respect and trust as I do with the US clients. And the Vietnamese clients, even though they're large corporations, they don't have a common practice of using consultants and professionals to provide advice for them. So thus, it takes a long time to build a certain level of trust before they go to you for all their corporate, legal, or business needs. That's really kind of the main differences. And aside from language, aside from establishing your credibility and going back to kind of the community building. I had to build 3 communities after UCLA's. I went to San Francisco, I only had 1 friend. And then after finished school, I went back to Orange County and rebuilt a community there. And then now in Vietnam, I had about 15 or 20 clients. So rebuilding the community there.
Wow.
And that would probably be another program, but how to adapt to life in a different country. Fortunately, I speak the language of each of those places that I've been to. But I see a lot of expats who do not speak the local language, and how they interact and how do they work in a particular foreign country.
You're bringing up some really interesting topics. I want to try to pick apart a couple of those things that you brought up. What would you say, going back to, you talked about some of your customers in Vietnam and the ways in which they operate are a little bit different from the ways in which the US-based customers operate. Tommy and Jennifer, I'd love to hear from you guys around what do you think are some unique challenges that you face starting a business in Asia and growing it?
I would let me start first. I would say for the unique challenge is in Asia, basically there could be 2 big markets, which is one of the market or go-to market strategy would be to go China. Particularly for my situation, as in I'm Hong Kong-based startup, so or another direction would be go Asia, go Southeast Asia. So the good thing would be both markets have huge populations. So which means that a lot of the time you're doing some mass, if you sell some mass product, then you can have a mass population to support that. But then the operation would be totally different. To go China, the social media, the tools for marketing, the tools for legal procedures would be quite different from what I have been using as in Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo. So there would be cultural adaptation. That could be the challenge could really comes to if you try to use one way fits all games for the business operation, it's gonna be tough.
Yeah.
And most of the time, the investor would ask you to choose one way. Maybe some investor would say, hey, go China. There could be 1.3 billion people. But then maybe the other investor would worry about the capital flows and legal stuff.
Yeah, that is interesting. When you have 1.2, 1.3 billion people, it's a huge market, but there's also challenges that come along with playing, in something that big. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe on that same thread, I think, and also maybe picking up on what Kenneth talked about with IP, I think that's been an issue that I've had to grapple with. Less so in Singapore, although it does happen here too. I mean, people, kind of taking ideas, adapting, and then trying to do their own, and not giving any credit and things like that. And that happens around the world. In terms of protection in Singapore, even amongst within authorities, their earlier days, I mean, there was little recognition of IP or even understanding of what that really meant. So that was when I first moved back to Singapore. So that was a little bit of a challenge, even getting the grant from the government and who owned IP and all of that. So that was a little bit of challenge, kind of navigating that. But in my family business with the aesthetics, and we've done a lot of work in China. Of course, a big challenge there is, of course, the protection of the IP there. Working with suppliers, not knowing where products then get replicated, repackaged, whatever, and also even blatant use of brand and things like that. So these are, I think, challenges that are maybe a little bit more prevalent, issues that we'd have to deal with more of here than we would have in the US, for example.
Yeah, yeah, interesting. So something that we've kind of touched on a little bit, but I think it's worth revisiting is this idea of fundraising, right? And making sure that your capital, that you have the money you need in order to do business. I'd love to hear about if you guys are willing to share kind of your experiences with discussing your businesses with investors, whether they're US based, if they're based in Asia, as well as like if there was anything that surprised you about that process as you went through it.
I could start. For me, it's more about working with startups, both in the United States and then now in Vietnam. Having the community, both from the government, supporting startups, having funds for startups, to venture capital funds, angel investors. And in the last 5 years, Vietnam has boomed tremendously in startups, and then having quite a few successful exits, which further speeds up the startup. But Vietnam right now has a great ecosystem, from the schools that train programmers and software developers and engineers to there's a company called 500 Startups based in Silicon Valley. And they do investments at pre-seed. And also there's a couple of other ones that do seed and then Series A. And then right now, Series B, you have to go outside to get it. But at least from pre-seed to A, you can get it all based in Vietnam or Singaporean funds. So the companies, and you can go a lot further with just a smaller investment amount. We've structured securities for clients. But the one main challenge of getting funding in Vietnam is many of the funds they invest into Vietnam, but they're based outside of Vietnam, predominantly in Singapore, due to the transparency in the laws, the securities laws, the corporate banking laws, and also currency changes and transfers. Vietnam is very difficult. They have a lot of regulations. So investors aren't as keen investing into Vietnam right away with their funds. They would go through Singapore. But the one main issue that we've gone through with many clients is that they'll open up their Vietnam companies. Of course, that's where they started. And then to get funding, they'd have to open up a Singaporean company and then repurchase their existing company. And it sounds easy from a theory standpoint, but from the cost standpoint, it's actually quite a bit. It could cost up to $10,000 to get that structure, and then a maintenance fee of roughly $5,000 a year, depending on type of entities. And that's actually a lot of money for any startup, really. But in Vietnam, for sure, if you're getting $50,000 funding and you're planning the next 3 years that you may not get the second round, 15,000 is a lot of money.
Especially when it's not going towards growth, it's more towards just having table stakes available. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, not to the main areas for business development, for marketing, for software development. These are cost for protection mechanisms that down the line. But most of the startups are thinking, I'll just grow as fast as I can, and then we'll think about the legal stuff later.
Yeah. So I want to, we're getting some questions from the audience, and I want to make sure that we can have time to answer them. So I'd love to hear from each of you. This question's from Sylvia. What are the top 3 management tips you can share at the beginning of your startup? And then there's a separate question for specific tips for networking in the Hong Kong startup community. So let's do rapid fire with the first question. So can each of you share what your top 3 management tips would be for the beginning stages of your startup?
Maybe let me start first. I would say management, since management is about managing people and project, right? So it's really have to balance the effectiveness of managing a project and people, right? So we need people running it, maybe joining with computer going for efficiency. So I would say the top 3 qualities I would say would be empathy, consistent, and really positive. So the reasons for having empathy is you got to be human. Even though you could be boss, you could be entrepreneurs, but then you got to be human to understand the employees and the customers so that you can do good things. And for consistency, I would say it's more about consistency of the values. It's how you what's your attitude will be when you get everything, but then what's your attitude when you lose everything. So it's still about consistency that convince people to follow you. Entrepreneur is like leader needs followers. So followers do not follow for money, they follow values. So consistency is really important. And the last thing I would say is stay positive, because for most business there will be good times and bad time, and it really makes a difference between businesses when it's about their views when the bad times comes, how to stay positive during the turmoil.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head there with empathy. It reminds me of this leadership quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? And it's all about building a strong culture that your people can really lean into and feel like they're a part of. So that's thank you for sharing that. Ken, Jennifer, top 3 management tips.
Well, I think I'd like to add on a little bit to that one. Empathy, surely. I think for me, perseverance. I think Tommy had touched on a little bit on that, but that I cannot stress how important that is, because it is when you're starting something up and treading a path that nobody else has treaded, especially if you're creating an innovative product or service. It's hard because you don't have any other past examples to follow, and also to get people to believe in it. So not just clients and partners, but also your own staff to believe that it can keep going. You need to stay positive and persevere. So they need to see that you're holding on to hope as well. So that's really important. So staying positive and that perseverance, knowing that, it's almost like a rah-rah for yourself, but also the team all the time. Just so a lot of team building, a lot of like just of doing that initially, and that keeps going on, because after you've built the team and you've seen through kind of the initial rough days before you stabilize the company, it is tough. So that team building part is really important. Staying positive for them, persevering, they see that, and then also the other part of it is, I think, is actually before all of that is finding the right people with the right mindset, who are willing to grow with you on that process. Because as much as you need supporters who are your clients and everyone else, the team are the people who's going to kind of help you drive your business forward in the initial days.
Yeah. Yep. Finding the right people stuff. It's quite, yeah. Ken?
And with a mindset that's willing to kind of delve into that startup, situation.
Yeah. If we have time, I definitely want to circle back to that, because that's we could do a whole seminar just on that. Ken, what are your top 3 management tips?
I'll just add 3 very practical ones. The first one is making sure your vision, mission, and corporate culture is clear, because that's what you're going to send to all employees, to partners, so they know it's very clear where you're going, how you plan to get there, and what vehicle you're using. So making that clear. 2 is identifying partners that have complementary skills to you. For example, I have legal skills, so I need a marketing partner and I need a finance partner. Of course, you need a technical person as well, and then sales. So identifying 3 to 4 people with complementary skills that you have, so that you can grow together. And then the last one is, I think, at least putting together a simple or a solid business plan that can guide you through and make you think about the financials, makes you think about the operations, how do you plan, how do you sell, and then marketing. So at least the basics of a good business plan, so you know where you're going and how to get there.
Got it. And so let's see, any specific tips for networking in the Hong Kong startup community? And I think it might also be worthwhile to just kind of, we can expand that, and maybe if anybody has tips on Hong Kong specifically, yes. I'd love to hear that, but more broadly, kind of how do you network within a startup community in Asia?
Then maybe let me start with Hong Kong, right? For networking again, so we will have to think about why do we network? We network for the sake of what Jennifer and Ken just suggest, to get the right people, to get the right partners, right? So to find the skill set that complement to what you have right now, right? So for Hong Kong, most businesses have to identify what they need. Supposedly, if you need network in China, then go to the networking organizations. There are a bunch of them. But then if you want to go Asia, go America, then there are still US chambers, other chambers to do the networking. But then to entrepreneur, I would say this is not an easy task. You can go all the way to join most of the parties, most of the events, but then eventually, after 1 month or 2 months, it's easy to feel time wasted. Because if you don't know what networks and what kind of things that you really want, you kind of get a lot of name cards, but then you don't know how to utilize it. So I would say, at least in Hong Kong, there are meetup events. There are meetup events almost every week, could be every day during the peaceful time. So there are a bunch of options. So go to the meetup events, locate the people that could help you. If you want to find the right people, let's say for computer engineers, then go to the meetup events from the engineers. Then you will get the network that you want.
Got it. Got it. This is really fantastic advice. I know that starting a community, Ken, you mentioned this as well. It's tough. It's challenging. So you have to find the right people, complementary skill sets. This is all really, really helpful stuff. So Jennifer, do you have anything to add on the markets?
Yeah. Well, I guess in Singapore, I mean, it's probably as good as any time right now to be a startup in terms of networking. And Singapore is, in a way, Singapore's a bit easier. We're small. It's easy to meet people and get to know people within this community quite easily, and to make contacts. You know, you're 2 degrees of separation from pretty much anybody that you want to meet within Singapore. But also the community is just so connected now, what with, you know, your co-working spaces, your networking groups, your meetup groups, and the startup scene here is really vibrant. So in terms of getting support, finding other people who are within the same space, it's getting a lot easier, just because, you know, you'll meet someone. But I think one of the things that's really important for me in my experience networking is just not to you know, have too specific an idea of what you want to get out of a networking session, because sometimes keeping it open, you never know who leads on to what. Somebody from a very different background, from a very different industry, might have the right connections for you to make that next step, take that next step forward. So for me, I love networking. I love meeting new people and just getting to know people in general. So for me, it's not a big deal. It's almost like going and socializing. But I think there is a little bit of an art to it too, especially when you're looking very specifically at certain outcomes. But I think when you have that lens on, when you go to any networking event, you almost prevent yourself from finding that next person if you're too focused on specific outcomes.
That's a really interesting take. What you don't know, what you don't know. And so if you go in with an open mind, you can sometimes be surprised. I like that. That's also a good thing to keep in mind. So let's see. So we have a question from Xavier. This is one for Ken. Ken, which city would be good to open an office for a digital advertising agency that services international companies?
Great. Thank you for Xavier for the question. And so really in Vietnam, there are 2 main cities. You have Hanoi, which is the capital. And then you have Ho Chi Minh City, which is what we consider the economic capital. Ho Chi Minh, there are quite a few digital advertising companies, franchises that open up in Ho Chi Minh City. But to be perfectly honest with you, in order to get those big the contracts from large multinational corporations, you need to have an office in both places because content is highly regulated in Vietnam, especially digital advertising agencies where you can disseminate the content very quickly. You need to have an office in Hanoi for the relationships with the various ministries that you work with. But the majority of the large corporations and their, what we call like the brain center or the decision makers will be in Ho Chi Minh City because there are a lot more international foreign direct investments and companies willing to use the resources in order to advertise their businesses. So my recommendation is to open up your main office in Ho Chi Minh City and have a branch office in Hanoi for the various government relations. And that's a very typical multinational corporation strategy, especially in the digital advertising space.
Interesting. Any thoughts from anyone else, just kind of more broadly, setting up businesses that kind of cater to the broader international audience?
I would say let me add something on it because right now because cost actually matters for the HR cost, right, for the right people. So setting up different offices, I would say let's say there could be more good designers in certain countries, certain cities. There could be more or cheaper computer engineers in maybe in some other countries in Asia. So it could be the operation could be you have a headquarters in a really international city in Asia, and then you have your sub office, which is to like outsourcing, but then it's not really outsourcing because it's still your own team, but then you build your team in other areas like in India, in Taipei, in Asia, the cities in Asia.
Yeah, can we expand on that a little bit? This idea of team building and Jennifer, you talked about hiring, and I'd love to hear about how you guys went through the process of bringing on your first employees. What you were looking for. We've talked about complementary skill sets, and that's important. That's especially true with your founding team. But what does hiring in Asia look like? What were some of the things that make it really good, and what are some of the challenges associated with it?
Well, I guess in my context, when I got started up with a content creation platform for children, of course, we were looking for the very first few employees. Being very cash strapped, of course, we had to be sure that they were willing to get their hands dirty. So not just have certain skills, within the in design, and also having some knowledge in creating children's educational content, or just artistic creative content, but really just down to the actual production and all of that. It's just, I think that one of the criteria was you must be willing to get your hands dirty, and be the one who's actually down there at midnight if we have to get things done.
So how do you keep that out in the interview process, I suppose? Like what exactly was it that you were looking for?
I think it really is finding the person who shares the same values, the same passion. So for me, it was really about raising children's voices, about creating spaces for them where we can hold space for children, and finding people who identified with that. So if you believe in that, you would naturally want to be doing it. We're all working together. They see themselves as part of a founding team and not just as employees, and being personally invested because they're invested in the vision of the company. So I think that's in a way it's really hard as a business grows bigger. And I've run a business with just within Singapore, about 100 employees within the business in 12 different locations. I mean, it gets a little bit harder to keep that vision sharp enough for everyone to adopt that vision. But when you're starting up, the founding team is so important because it could almost make or break. I mean, if you're running low on steam and there are people within the team that's kind of pulling you down, yeah, I don't want to do this, or, you know, it gets really hard. So you need to build that community also within the office.
Yeah, yeah, goes back to community.
Yes.
Tommy, Ken, any thoughts on that hiring process and kind of what you guys what you look for specifically through it?
I would say for the first group of people that we want to who is willing to get their hands dirty, most of them, I would say most of them I got it from my personal network, from referrals instead of from a really public recruitment. So after I get a bunch of like funding teams, in my funding team we have 6 people and we are really committed. So, and from this funding team, then I try to expand it through their referral. So for the first few groups of people, I would say for referral, it saved a lot of time and resources for locating the right candidates. And then when my company grows bigger to become 20, 30 people, then it starts to, it is so important to have a culture, and procedure. And I would say it's all to me, there's one trick that I use, which is to do trust building, which is, let's say for any new candidate comes into my company right now, they will have usually it's, there will be like 3-month trial period, right? During the trials, I would say it's really nothing quantitative. It's the qualitative measures of if you have the trust in that candidate, and if you have the trust, then if that candidate goes somewhere else to work at home, work outside office, work during vacation, do you believe in him or her? If you have that trust, then good enough. So in the end, I would have my managers to answer me that question. If you have the trust of letting the subordinates work anywhere in the world, then that will be good. And we kind of following this discipline, and we have a pretty strong team. And our retentions for most of my staff works for more than 5 years.
Can I just quickly add on to that? Because I think that maybe it's a little bit of a cultural thing as well. I mean, having worked in the US and then coming over to Singapore, you know, and seeing a little bit of corporate cultures here, I think that trust was something that I felt was maybe a little bit of a adaptation. You know, within the corporate cultures here, I think in more traditional companies, I wouldn't say like the you know, new economy companies that come here, but maybe in the more traditional companies and more traditional managers, it's still very top down, and a lot of power is still kind of controlled or held at the top. So it is quite refreshing, you know, for also new employees to come into a space where they feel that they are empowered and that they have that trust to be able to do what they want. Because at the end of the day, you just want the deliverables, right? You just need the output that's done. And if they're doing it whatever way they want, I mean, that's good enough. But I think that's been a cultural, very slow cultural shift that's only just starting to take place here now. But it still is, I think, for anyone who's looking to come to Asia to work, I think that maybe is an expectation to kind of tweak a little bit when you come here and work within more traditional companies.
Yeah.
Ken, any thoughts from you on the hiring practice?
Yeah, I mean, I'll share really quickly just about finding partners first. In our first 10 years, I've had one partner, and then more recently, a UCLA Bruin joining as well as a Vietnam partner. So we have a French-Portuguese partner, a Peruvian, me as a Vietnamese American, and then we have a Vietnamese. So the creating the corporate culture and trying to understand each other and the decisions we make is actually very, it's challenging at times. But once you're on the same page, you move forward and you implement it for the staff. And to the hiring process in Vietnam, Adelco, a recruiting company, did a statistics about 10 years ago. The top three kind of incentives for employees was just really salary, time leave, and then environment. But then more recently, the top one is actually a clear path to advancement, and then work environment, and then salary. So what I've learned here is because Vietnam's a very young population, 50% are under 30 years old. So they actually want to learn, they want to grow instead of just looking for the highest money that they can make. So I think that makes a lot of sense in the hiring process, where we hire for drive, motivation, willingness to learn and grow. And many times we would rather invest in a fourth year university student and then hiring right on afterwards, instead of hiring somebody with 3 to 4 years of experience, because the corporate culture for Vietnamese companies is much different than international companies. So sometimes you'd rather get someone fresh, develop and train them. So I can understand why training is so critical and important for new staff. And that's who we look for. We're willing to, if you have a good attitude, we can train the skills. That's not the hard part.
Yeah, yeah. Got it. Well, thank you to all of you for taking the time. This was amazing. I really enjoyed our conversation. I think we covered the gambit here. We talked about product market fit, fundraising, finding team, building culture, finding empathy. This was really great. Thank you again, Ken, Tommy, Jennifer. This was something really special. Thank you to everybody in the audience for tuning in. Make sure you check back for future UCLA alumni webinars and events. And thank you, everybody. Thank you again.
Great. Thank you so much, Matt.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.